And now I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Leadership and Development, Leading and Adapting to Change in a Complex World. I'm going to hand things over to our featured presenter today. She is an executive leadership and career coach, Erin Cambier. Erin, you now have the floor.
There we go. Thank you. I was like, how do I have sign language for? I think I'm still muted. Thank you, Marianne. I'm really excited to be here today and talk with you all about leading and adapting to change in a complex world, because as we know, that's likely the environment that we are all in right now. And if your organization has progressed through some of these change cycles, you will continue to have other change cycles in the future. So learning about how we can thrive in this environment is a really key skill that will help us as we keep moving forward. So a little bit about why I'm here to talk about this topic with you. All of my background is in leadership and career development. I've spent my entire career helping professionals, leaders, and managers navigate through change, because ultimately that's what life is all about. That's what success in our career is all about, is change. So I'm really excited to talk about some things that I've learned from a lot of different professionals and people along the way as well. So during this webinar today, we are going to learn how to utilize the critical skills in leading and adapting through change. We're going to talk about how we can harness the power of change to actually thrive, how we can leverage fundamental values to build a better workplace, and develop an understanding of the change cycle. We included a quote here on this slide that says, "It's in the middle of difficulty where opportunity lies." And this is one of my favorite quotes. Of all time, it's always been one of my favorite quotes. It's by Einstein, and it brings me back to the center, especially in periods of change, and especially in this current world pandemic environment. Recognizing that actually in the middle of some of this difficulty is where the best growth can come. It's where the most opportunity can be if we can capitalize on that, recognize that, and use this to help make us better. It said there are two kinds of people in the world who navigate as we go through change or crisis or high stress environments. And those two different kinds of people are asking two different kinds of questions. They're either asking, when is this going to be over? As in, how long will this last? And of course, yes, we've all asked that to ourselves at least once in the middle of this current situation. But there's another higher level of thinking that we can bring to that. And not specifically focusing on when will it be over, but specifically, how can I grow through this? How can I take this current circumstance and learn in this process? How can I make this a stepping stone instead of a stumbling block so that I can continue to get better? That's the biggest shift that we can make as we start to think about change and leading through change. So the need for a new type of leadership. We're using the word leader throughout this presentation and throughout a majority of our courses with New Horizons that are in leadership and development. And I like to point out that the word leader isn't necessarily defined by your job title. That a leader is someone who operates through influence. And hopefully each of you can say that you influence someone else, whether it be in your home or in your workplace. And it doesn't necessarily need to be your job title, whether you're a senior executive or a manager or you have no direct reports. We all can be leaders in the workplace. So as we refer to leadership throughout this webinar, especially today, I want you to think about how whether you're in a title of a leader or not, you can be a leader in terms of how you operate and through influence. So it says here, our world of uncertainty is creating an unprecedented need for a new type of leadership identity. This new identity requires a new way to perceive and evaluate the world. In other words, a new mindset, a new outlook that within a fast-paced, constantly changing environment, it's so critical for us to have leaders who operate by principles, values, and beliefs. And I know how easy it is, especially in the course of change or a world crisis situation, for us to be brought off course in that, right? It's easy for us to feel like we're being led by other people or situation or circumstances. What I want to start to empower you and remind you is that we all can lead ourselves, and we can't change our circumstances, but we can decide what we do with those circumstances. So it's critical, especially in change, that leaders know and operate by who they are, meaning what drives me, what are my values, where they're going. We may not know the end goal in terms of where I'm going. Right now, I may not know what's going to happen with my organization. How will things evolve once things get back to normal or the new normal? I may not know that exactly, but as a leader, I can create clarity in where I'm going within that, in terms of how I will operate. What are my values, principles, and beliefs that I will bring into the workplace every day? And then why they're going there is that third one. So I want you to really give that some thought now as we keep going through this webinar about, do I clearly know that? And do I clearly operate in a way that my team knows that also? That what my principles, values, and beliefs are of who I am, where I'm going, and why I am going there. The need for a new type of leadership. Really, it is all surrounding the concept that we have to, as leaders, be all about the people. So what are our priorities? And do our actions match our priorities? Again, in periods of change, it can feel like we're being swayed or pulled one direction or putting out one fire after another fire. But ultimately, are we keeping our head above the clouds and really looking at, how does this impact the people, the team, the customer, my colleagues, the people in the organization? Am I willing to stand up for my values and priorities within this period of high and fast-paced change? Future leaders need to operate with vision and drive purpose. So the question there, it says, in times of flux and transformation, will you be able to set direction? And that likely is even right now in your current work situation or in your home, whatever that dynamic is, it's likely still going through this flux and transformation. So operating with vision and purpose and knowing clearly who I am and this is what I'm going to be about. And values can be specifically focus on, it's all about the people. How I go about that might be different. In a remote work environment is going to look different than it did in the office environment. So how I do that will need to adapt and be adjustable. But setting direction, operating by goals, values, vision, and purpose can still happen. So as we're thinking about what kind of leader do I want to be, it's really taking a pause to remember that every single day we go to work, we are actually making a choice. We're making a choice for, how do I want to lead today? How do I want to interact? And if we don't consciously make that choice, we're still going to be making that choice subconsciously. And that's where we can easily get drawn one direction or the other. So choose a style. Choose what's important to you. Am I going to operate in a way that is all about the people? Choose to operate in a way that's purposeful, authentic, and agile, because that's exactly what will help you be successful across a variety of different challenges and work environments. It says, to thrive and change, leaders must be able to serve the best interests of all. That's it sounds very simple, but as we know, serving the best interests of all is not necessarily an easy thing. But if we can keep our eyes on the prize, in other words, our eyes on our goals and our purpose, that becomes much easier to execute. In order to help us best serve the interests of all, it's really getting back to those core relationship dynamics, learning about each individual, encouraging greater collaboration, establishing personal connections, and listening to a wide range of concerns. Notice it doesn't say anything about tell your teams to do X, Y, Z, or make sure that you tell your teams that. In fact, it's more about listening and building relationships than anything else. So I know we can feel like if we're in a leadership role, especially in change, everyone's coming to us for all the answers and I need to give them the answers. But actually, our ability to learn about each individual, collaborate, establish personal connections, and listen will be more impactful in serving them and helping lead them to the answers in that process. Let's think about what it says in the first paragraph there, authentic and agile. Let's think about authenticity and what that looks like and feels like. Authentic leadership requires, of course, leading with integrity. Authentic leadership is critical all the time, but especially when we're in periods of a lot of change, right? In a world crisis, authenticity is critical. Your teams want authenticity more than they want your perfection. They don't necessarily expect you to have all the answers. They want you genuine and transparent, not perfect. So here's a reminder. I felt like I should put it on every single slide, but you'll hear me say it often: put your people first. And John Maxwell is a famous leadership author and speaker, and he says this often, and it's the core of all of his teaching. And it's something that will absolutely make you successful in your leadership, that people need to trust you, and it takes a long time to earn trust. But as we know, it can be lost very quickly. So it's important to recognize that authenticity has to be a purposeful leadership skill, that you have to choose, my actions will be congruent with my words. You have to choose to be a transparent truth teller, always. You have to choose to stay connected with your team, to know what's going on, to let them see you, access you, connect with you. Even if you're working remotely right now and they're working remotely, you can still stay connected. And I would suggest that it's even more important that you stay connected if you're working remotely. But yet you can remain focused on the big picture. So you can stay connected and know what's going on, but be focused on those goals and in mission there. Lead with clear values and act in accordance with them. We must do this all the time to recognize that this contributes to our authenticity. And authenticity is an area that I find frequently falls into one of our blind spots. I have never worked with a leader, either one-on-one or in a group dynamic, where they have said, I know that I'm inauthentic and I'm okay with that, or that they have intentionally set out to lose trust or to not follow through on their word, unless they're, literally crazy, which I've never encountered in 20 years. It just doesn't happen. Most people have good intentions. We want to be authentic. We want to be a truth teller, but we can get swayed easily. And this is where really identifying what are my values and my goals and how can I operate in ways that align with them is critical. Your actions must match your words. You cannot overpromise, because then all of a sudden you will underdeliver. And then you will by default end up actually losing trust, losing credibility, and your authenticity will be impacted in that. Authenticity is critical if we're going to build trust-based relationships and foster committed followership. Obviously, we know these things are important. As leaders, I really want you to give this some thought and maybe ask your team a little bit about that list there, about leading with integrity, and maybe some areas that they see of strength for you, or also some areas of growth. Or if you recognize some of those areas for growth, that you put that in an action plan. You don't just say, well, I hope tomorrow is better, but you're purposeful in your leadership. You're purposeful in your communication. You're purposeful in your ability to stay connected. All of these things can be, purposeful leadership can be brought in. Remember that uncertainty is okay. You don't need to have all the answers. No one has all the answers, but your authenticity in that is what your team will learn to rely on in the process. So let's talk about build a passion for excellence. You may know that successful organizations have leaders who inspire excellence. So are you a leader that inspires excellence? When you go to work every day, are you helping to build a culture of excellence? Maybe that's your colleagues, maybe that's the team that works for you. As the slide says, from the top down, organizations with highly engaged employees have a vision that inspires excellence. They have open, transparent communication. So that's built into our culture. The culture isn't just about from the top down, we tell you what's happening, but it's ongoing communication. We listen, we ask questions, we create a culture of open feedback. And leaders who are passionate about the organization and work and lead by example. All of those things create highly engaged employees. Has anybody worked on a team with highly engaged employees? It's a team usually we want to be a part of, right? Engagement is people that are excited about the work, they're passionate about the work. When we're engaged in something, the day flies by and we don't feel like it's work at all. So in order to build that, we have to operate with those 3 bullets listed on the page here. Remember that crisis or high periods of change, it doesn't necessarily make us, it actually reveals what's already inside of us. Fast-paced change or crisis pulls out what's already there. In other words, what comes out, what's there will come out in the crisis. If you squeeze a lemon, what comes out? Lemon juice, not lemonade. If you smash a grape, what's inside comes out, grape juice. Positive or negative will come out. So if you are in the midst of fast change right now, of a lot of organizational uncertainty, remember that you can control what goes into you right now. That we do have control over our choices, even when we don't have control over our circumstances. It's more important now than ever to spend some time building yourself, whether that be daily meditation, maybe a gratitude journal, just taking time for yourself. Filter what you're listening to and reading so that you're staying connected to the things that help you build passion, help you stay connected, that you can become better through this and inspire others to do the same with what you're putting in, so that when you're stressed and what comes out is exactly what you want to share with your team. Just like steel is formed through a fire, so are we. Leaders are built through adversity. All the successful leaders that I know didn't become great leaders because everything was easy for them. They actually are great leaders because they navigated through some really hard stuff. Hard things lead to wisdom, and wisdom comes from learning to best play the hand that we've been dealt. At the end of the day, we can't control that hand, but we can decide what we do with it. So I challenge you right now in this ever-changing dynamic, what are you going to do with this hand that you've been dealt? What kind of leader are you going to be? How can you operate with vision? How can you create? And if you feel like you have a culture of transparency, how can you take that to the next level? How can you show your passion every day when you're at work so that you can inspire excellence? Let's talk about how technology impacts trust and our leadership. As you know, we live in a world where communication technology is changing how we interact every day. It's been critical for us to have technology even to do this webinar today and to navigate through this current world crisis, to allow us to have this remote work environment that many people are experiencing. Technology has been an amazing tool and resource. But the high dependence on technology can have immense implications for businesses building towards a sustained future, positive and negative. How people interact and build relationships is changing. So in other words, how I connect with people, how I network with people is different. Right now, I can't meet them in a coffee shop, but I have to remember that people are social by nature. This is physical distancing. It is not necessarily relational distancing. So as a leader, your job is to find ways to stay connected. To remember, as we have in the slide here, trust is built not by technical interaction, but by personal interactions. So use technology to help you build trust. Don't use technology as a crutch in terms of that's the only way that we communicate. So anytime we can bring in face-to-face or video conference, we're going to improve our level of communication. It's going to help us have better personal interactions, and it's going to allow us to build stronger relationships. Now, I'm not saying you can video conference for everything all the time, but I'm saying recognize the importance of that. And I know it's easier to pick up the phone, and it's maybe even easier to send an instant message, but decide what's important and what's the best way to share that as I'm building this team. If I'm wanting to build successful collaboration and help build trust in my team, I'm going to need to bring in ways that not only I can personally interact with my team, but that they can personally interact with each other more. So some other impacts to trust are listed here on the slide. When we just rely on technology, our trust level can go down a bit, meaning use technology in a positive way to create more social interactions. Don't necessarily just use it as a distancing tool. We actually have fewer opportunities for people to interact right now in person. So we have to recognize that we have to be more intentional about building trust and relationships. And this last bullet is really important. Organizations designed to have a high degree of social interaction will tend to exhibit more trust. And as a result, they will provide better service, they will have more satisfied customers, and they will make more money. Who doesn't want to be more profitable as an organization? In leadership, whether you're in a profit or nonprofit, Meeting our bottom line is important. Having the best service we can have is critical. Having satisfied customers and happy teams is critical. So the more we can create situations for that social interaction, the more we can build trust and be more successful as organizations. So let's start to make a shift here. It says business leaders also face unpredictable situations due to constantly evolving technology, globalization, increasing legal and regulatory compliance, and our organizational structures are pressured to evolve. So the shift I would like for you to start to make is what I mentioned in the beginning, towards harnessing the power of change and using that as a positive thing in a world of chaos, that we can recognize that change is actually the new normal. To be successful, we need a new strategy and a new approach and a new leadership style, but change is constant. Whether we're in the midst of a world crisis or not, our world was constantly changing even before this, and will consistently change. We will always have internal and external forces impacting our organization. At the end of the day, we get to decide what we do with it in terms of our leadership and our communication with our teams. So harnessing the power of change. I mentioned the words earlier, embrace change. In order to turn complexity and change into a positive, we need to learn how to embrace it and how to help our teams embrace that. A key word in that second line there is find ways to get people emotionally committed. We don't just want to say, here's a new program, roll with it, right? If you've tried that, you know it likely doesn't work. Or if it does work short term, it doesn't work long term. So the way that we can get people emotionally committed to change is understanding what drives them, motivating, inspiring, and engaging them, demonstrating trust, empowerment, and respect, and establishing that strong sense of meaning. It's important to recognize that change can actually create traction, because when we are in periods of change, it's typically a little bit more stressful. And now, while we may not choose high stress situations, a concept from emotional intelligence is that when we are under stress, our bodies, our brains, our minds are wired to get laser focused. So if I'm in fast, high periods of change, I'm going to get laser focused on what's most important, and I'm likely going to be able to then execute on what's most important. Many times it becomes easier to kind of weed out some of those uncritical things, because I have to only focus on the critical to get through this moment. Now, as we know, we can't operate that way forever. We cannot, our bodies, our brains wouldn't be good to be in that situation of stress forever. But through change, we can harness the power of that stress to get laser focused. Now, what I want you to do is make sure that what you're laser focusing on is what's most important. We don't want to take what could be created as traction and turn it into distraction. Distraction can be obviously a huge hindrance in the midst of change. So it's important that we know that we are laser focused on what is most important. And at the core of that, it really should be your people. How your people do business, how they interact with each other, how they build relationships. How, as a leader, can I serve my people? How can I lift them up? How can I encourage them? How can I help them collaborate? How can I share hope with them? This really is our biggest and most important priority in periods of change. And when you do that, all of those things listed on that slide will happen organically. It will help you gain momentum and get laser focused on what's most important and not get distracted. Focus on controlling what you can control. Focus on impacting your people, and it's going to help you harness the power of change. Remember that you don't have to have the answers. Ask questions. Check in with them often. If you would normally run into them in the break room and you don't have the chance to do that because you're working remotely anymore, pick up the phone, call them, reach out, build a common team identity based upon shared purpose and shared meaning. As we know, we have a limited time to respond to change, and this is where our intuition comes into play. Intuition is essential in a fast-paced, chaotic environment, and especially through change or a world crisis. You have to be willing to make judgment calls based upon your intuition in addition to logic. This is where I want you to free up your mind and your plate so that you can focus on what's most important. You have to delegate some non-critical things to your team so that your mind and energy can make those tough decisions. Someone else can run the report or send out an email or send out some general communication. It's critical that you identify what can I let go of so that you can develop the capacity to deal with uncertainty and risk. Developing your team will help you have the mental space to be able to apply your intuition and logic much more effectively and get through that uncertainty and risk seamlessly. So as we're talking about sustaining our change, so the change has initiated, now we're working through next steps of how do we keep moving through this change. It's important to evaluate what's the fear and some of the anxiety that's going on with our team. What's the fear and anxiety going on inside of us also? But pilot groups are a great way, or test groups are a great way to measure that. So you may have had an initial, here's what we're going to do, and it was a lot of change right away in the midst of the crisis. And maybe your organization is starting to fall into some patterns, but recognizing what are those patterns we're falling into, are they healthy or not? And are there new fears that are popping up? Because it's likely that there are, because we're all human. We all have fear and anxiety. Your job as a leader is to stay connected to that and to ask, how are we doing? Get perspective from your teams and get it often. Don't just think, okay, I found that out 2 months ago when we started working from home. So they're probably good. They were good then. I know you've probably talked to your team more often than 2 months ago, but have you asked those questions that are important to stay connected to who they are, what they're about, and so that you can help sustain the right change that you want for your organization? Here's an example of creating profound change. Use pilot groups to generate ideas. You may have already done this, and if you haven't, it's a great idea. Bring groups together, get their feedback, generate new ideas. That's the power of a diverse workforce. We all are going to bring different things to the dynamic. Stick to the rules, start small, grow steadily, be clear, but don't plan the whole thing out. Great leadership requires adaptability. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. But a great leader knows that flexibility is a positive attribute. So I want you to be extremely adaptable. Have a plan, but if that plan does not work, plan A, B, C, D, or E does not work, it's all right and it's totally acceptable to pull out those other plans in that, or to bring your teams back in again and ask for their feedback in that process. And also expect some challenges. Life isn't perfect and change won't always be perfect. Even the best laid plan will not always go exactly as we execute. So recognize that great leaders are going to be constantly adapting. Great leaders expect challenges and use that as a learning opportunity and not as an opportunity to beat ourselves up or, beat anyone up in that process, but to grow through that process. William Bridges, we have listed here the 3-phase transition model for effective change. So first we have the ending, which is ironic. First we have the ending. Second, we have the neutral zone. And third, we have the new beginning. We're going to talk about each of these. So the ending is just as it sounds. It's the ending of what we knew previously. It's important to understand what we are losing in that process or what has been lost, and to allow demonstration of that loss. If your team is new to the work remote environment, or even just their schedule changed at work, or whatever that is, there was likely some loss in that. So I know that there may be some good that has come, and that's outstanding, but we must allow our teams to recognize the loss and mark that ending, acknowledge the successes of the past, and work through that grieving really, so that we can get to that next stage, which is neutral. Neutral doesn't always sound great to us, right? We typically want to be moving forward, especially if you're a leader. You're probably someone who likes forward movement. So when I work with leaders, I find that often this is the phase that we struggle with the most. It's neutral because we are just being. We are being present, and we're acknowledging what is happening around us. We're evaluating that. We're gathering feedback. We are listening. We're creating understanding for our team. It said use metaphors to help your teams understand the importance of this change. And those metaphors might be, you've probably heard, transitioning from caterpillar to a butterfly, or going from darkness to light. Those are all, some pretty grandiose metaphors, but I want you to also listen for what your teams are saying, because often we speak in metaphors and we don't know it. So when you're talking to someone on your team and they say, I feel like the weight of the world is on me right now, that's a pretty heavy weight. That means that they're feeling a lot of stress. So let's not minimize that. Let's ask questions, let's probe, let's get to know them. Let's recognize that there are things that we can do in this neutral phase. We can encourage behaviors that support the new beginning, and we can reinforce the things that we want to see that will help keep our teams moving forward. And then we can shift to the new beginnings. As we're shifting to the new beginnings, be ready for changes to the change plan, because as we know, it's all about change. So keep communicating, create and sustain that vision, explain roles so that our teams know and they're clearly connected to that, and celebrate those new beginnings also. So that's a quick overview. Obviously, it's very complex to lead through change, but recognizing where your teams are at is important in that, and also recognize that sometimes we shift a little bit between one stage or the other. So I may feel like the team went through recognizing the loss and we're in neutral, but we might shift back a little bit depending upon that change dynamic. That's okay. Our job is to help keep our teams recognize where we are and they are, and help have purpose throughout that cycle. There are many issues that we are dealing with in the 21st century in our organizations, whether it's our multi-generational workforce, whether it's more and more virtual teams, whether it's the way that we have to change our leadership to support a more flexible approach to the way that we deliver leadership, or our increasing reliance on technology. Ironically, we've been delivering this presentation for a much longer time than even this world crisis, but all of these things are very relevant to the world crisis and outside of a world crisis. All of these things are relevant no matter when you're watching this, that our organizations are always faced with change. And what we decide to do with that as a leader is important. We have to recognize that we have to create a new cultural reality. That this hierarchy cannot necessarily just be top-down decisions, that we need to get collaboration, get feedback, help bring our teams into that decision-making process. I love that last sentence there. Being inclusive means getting to know your employees better. Think about, what can you do right now to help build a more inclusive culture? And if that's too hard of a question, because sometimes that's a broad question of, oh, I don't know what I can do, then just ask yourself, what can I do to get to know my employees better? And what can I do to help them get to know each other better also? Now, if you had the advantage of your team working in the same office prior to maybe a big change that they've gone through, you have some relationships that have formed, but recognize that whatever change your team is going through, it's critical that you actually foster and rebuild and strengthen those relationships. We can't just rely on them as past relationships, or as, oh, I really strengthened that, previously, I'm sure we're good now. Especially if they're reporting to you, especially if you're on a team with them. I challenge you, in order to build inclusivity, is also get to know your team and who they are. Remember that there is no replacing the effectiveness of face-to-face interaction, not just meetings. Face-to-face interaction is what builds trust. And the cost of not creating a strong sense of team identity based upon trust and human interaction is far higher than the cost of video conference, or the cost of even airline tickets for travel, or the cost of our pride of not wanting to be on video because we don't like being on video. That there is a much greater cost that's at play when we are not utilizing the technology that will help us create trust and build stronger relationships. So I also challenge you, if you are working remotely or work remotely in the future, to embrace the concept and help your teams embrace the concept of video conferencing, because this is a great tool to help you connect and build trust. Again, probably not 24/7, but in the right dynamics and right situations, it's going to help you much more purposefully move forward. We also need to think about changing how teams are managed. I mentioned that management control needs to move to management of the structure, not of the work. So not that top-down hierarchy. Remember that the more you let go of, the better leader you will be. It says on the slide, increased collaboration, multi-generational teams. There's a lot of different things that have forced us in a good way to shift our management paradigm. And so we're referring to this as a cultural evolution, not a revolution. In other words, we're evolving as a culture because our team's needs are evolving. We need to evolve as a leader. So in leading through change, your role is to create the conditions for, new team types to exist, like self-organizing teams. It doesn't always have to come from you as a leader. The more you've helped them build relationships, build inclusivity, and have connection, the easier that those self-organizing teams will evolve. And then the second one, push the control and coordination of the work to the people responsible for executing it. Again, the more you let go of, actually the more you gain in leadership. At the bottom, this is one of the most important sentences. Management control or leadership control moves to management of the structure, not of the work. So have I given up control of the coordination to the people responsible for executing it? Am I focused on the big picture goal of, are we getting to our goals? Are we getting there? Not necessarily worrying about getting in the weeds and all the details. This is something that can be discussed, much more in depth. And we have a course that specifically in the remote environment that we go into discussing that of how do I manage what my teams are doing without being a micromanager, with still building relationships, but making sure that I'm focused on management of the structure, not the work. And that course is leading and managing remote teams. It's a great opportunity to go more in depth on that. But either way, right now, you can start to make some shifts to what am I focusing on? How can I build better? How can I create conditions for self-organizing teams? And have I given up control of and coordination of the work to the people that are responsible for executing it, so that I can be clear to make those big picture decisions, that those purposeful decisions that need to happen on a day-to-day basis. The new mindset. If you're building a sustainable organization, you have to look for fresh ideas. You have to bring in new perspectives. And having teams, hopefully you have a diverse team. And if you don't have a diverse team, I encourage you to build one, because it actually makes us stronger. It makes us more successful. It helps bring in fresh ideas and new perspectives. And if you have made some shifts recently in your organization, it's a good time to rebring that in, rebring in that fresh perspective and fresh ideas from your team, recreate those connections so that your teams can feel engaged. Highly engaged employees exceed expectations when faced with uncertainty. That's outstanding, right? So when I think about when I've been highly engaged at work and uncertainty comes up, I can navigate through that. And the reason I can navigate through that is because those 3 bullets there, there is a strong vision defined and valued by the organization. It's because I have a clear understanding of the situation, and I'm working in an organization that is agile and adapts to changes quickly. So I want you to think about, what are you doing as a leader to bring in those 3 things? You want to create a highly engaged workforce. You want them to be able to navigate through change, through uncertainty. We can't control what other people do or think or feel. We can't control any of those things. But what we can do is control the dynamic and the environment that we create that will best set them up for success. And that's listed with those 3 things there on the slide. As I mentioned, that command and control structure of leadership is really becoming obsolete. And as a leader, we have to remain flexible. We have to be adaptable. Someone told me once that a great leader has a plan, and an even better leader adjusts that plan frequently. And the example I like to share is a coach. When we think about a coach, they're going into the game, they have a plan. They probably have like a plan A, B, and C because they've watched tape of the other team or video footage or whatever that is. The coach has a plan, they go in. And great coaches do have a plan. But amazing, outstanding, most impactful coaches that get results adjust that plan at halftime. The best coaches are made at halftime because they take what's happened and they also tie that in with, okay, I have to make some adjustments based upon my initial plan. We need to make some adjustments because this is what's going on right now. So I encourage you that adaptability, flexibility, be that great coach to continue to be flexible with your team. And remember that that's what will build a sustainable organization. Building a path to the future will include a committed workforce of highly engaged employees who have the flexibility to manage the work, who stay engaged, are adaptable. Successful organizations will also have leadership supporting employees through coaching and mentoring. It doesn't say you have to be a leader who knows all the answers and tells all the answers. In fact, a great coach and mentor asks great questions. Successful organizations, in the last bullet says, have purpose that resonates with management and staff. So create clarity in your purpose, in your vision, what you see for your team. It's going to allow you to move forward much more effectively. So this is a small snippet of our entire course about leading change in a complex world. Obviously, we can't go in depth on every single topic, but if you join our full course, we'll be able to go, much more in depth and actually do some real world exercises and activities and talk about how do these concepts apply to your work, your leadership, etc. You'll leave with an action plan. It's a really fun course to be a part of. I'll turn it back over to Mayanne.
Great, thank you so much, Erin. Appreciate that. Just a quick reminder, everyone. Just some things, just looking at the slide. New Horizons has been teaching virtual training and since 2001. So we know the space. We know what training is needed, especially during these times of immense change. And just echoing what Erin was saying in terms of our classes and courses, many of our classes relate to this topic. A lot of our popular titles include expanding your emotional intelligence, managing remote and virtual teams, leading change in a complex world, which totally fits this webinar session to a T, mastering positive assertiveness, and becoming a transformational leader. Please, if you're interested in any of the material that was presented in this webinar, or if you have questions just in relation to the courses that are that circle around this topic in general, please feel free to reach out to your local center to get more information. You can also log on to newhorizons.com and just do a zip code search, find that center that's closest and nearest to you. Also, a lot of our facilitators and instructors are trained to teach virtually and face-to-face along in all of our courses. And also, like I said, our Center of Leadership and Development, we have nearly 50, 60 post-class resources and additional practice and guidance available to you. So please take advantage of that and take a look and see what we have available to you. Also, a quick reminder here, our webinar schedule is up to date on our website. If you go to newhorizons.com, just click on the webinars link just to take a view of our full schedule and just register for any upcoming sessions. We do have our leadership and development webinars once a month. So please feel free to sign up for an upcoming one. And another friendly reminder that we will be sending out the recording link to view today's webinar as well, or for you to pass on to any colleagues who are unable to join this session. If you could, please, everyone, feel free to type in your questions as we go through a few here that we have coming through. So take the time just to do that. The first question that we have, Erin, is there any advice to manage your emotional reaction to change? Sometimes when things change at work, I take them personally before looking at the bigger picture or the why. So understanding the why really helps me, but I don't know how to ask for the why if it isn't offered first.
Oh, such a good question, isn't that? Okay, so I'm going to try to answer that. It's a really in-depth question in a short way. First of all, your awareness that you want to be better at managing it in the moment, and you also know that you need the why. Your self-awareness there is huge. So having that self-awareness to be able to recognize when I'm in stress or a lot of change, I typically, react in a way that I don't want. And here's what I want to do, is number one important. Number two, many times it can be just that purposeful pause, giving yourself permission to, whether that be take a 5-minute break or just listen for 5 minutes, listen for an hour, so that you can process some of those emotions first, knowing that you want to get to the why, and you will have a chance to get to the why. And that I recognize you're saying, if I hear the why, it's going to help me de-stress. If you can ask it right away, great, ask it. If you can do that in a non-confrontational manner, but knowing that we still can control us, and having that pause in that process is important, because it's so hard. We're trying to lead our teams through change, and they have emotions going on. We're human, we have emotions. One of my favorite courses that New Horizons has is our emotional intelligence course. And that's what I thought of immediately, is one of the best things you could do is go through the emotional intelligence course or read up on emotional intelligence, because it will help you learn different ways to navigate those high stress situations. We're still going to have stress. We will still have a response, but understanding that will help us be able to, really tailor and have the best response that we want in the moment. That wasn't a short answer, sorry.
Not a problem. It was a good answer. The next question we have is, what would be the most effective model for leadership, you think, during the current situation with COVID-19 and everything? And how will I change business as we know it today? Or how will it change the business as we know it today, especially since it is a period of leading and adapting through something that's more complex than we can understand. How do you feel that it can change things moving forward?
Okay, just to make sure I'm understanding the question, is what was the first part of the question?
The most effective model of leadership you feel during this current time with COVID-19 worldwide, and how can we apply that moving forward, whatever that business model is?
Okay, so I think this is going to need to be adapted to your organization and your business. But if ultimately that model is focused on putting your people first, creating communication and collaboration, building and sustaining trust, whatever model you decide to execute will be much more effective and will work for your organization. It's really, sometimes we can get caught up again in the logistics of the day-to-day. And while we do need to focus on the logistics, we need to remember that at the core of any successful model for leadership or business has to be the people. And as leaders, the more that we can help not just them connect with us, but connect with each other, the more effective that will be. And I really believe that adaptability, that second part of the question of how do we adapt that as we move forward, I really hope that that's a huge positive that comes out of this, is us recognizing the importance of relationships and fostering them, and continuing to utilize that moving forward, because through any change in the future, you'll be able to utilize those same concepts to help you and your team succeed.
Great. This is actually an interesting question that just came in here. How do you manage a leader who is pretty much set in their ways by managing what they're calling the old school way, by shouting down the direction and does not think about engaging? How can you work and manage someone who is like that?
Okay, I'm sure we have all worked for a leader or with a leader like this at some point in our career. So I can relate with this question. And I would suggest that we, especially if it's your leader, you can't manage them, of course, but you can manage what you do with that and how you respond to that situation. You can create potentially maybe a feedback culture or a dynamic. You can foster the relationship with that person to potentially open the door for a two-way conversation of feedback. Now, that may not be the case. You may be like, they're not going to hear any feedback. That's just the way that they are, and it is what it is. You can still create some healthy boundaries for what you will or will not do based upon that situation. You can decide to take a break. We don't have to be susceptible to any type of extremely unhealthy environments just because we work in organizations. So use your resources, take a break, set healthy boundaries, find, can you partner with HR on how to create some healthy boundaries for yourself or for your team? Many times if you have a conversation with your boss, there is a way that you can bring in, this is how, you're not telling them like this is what I will do, but you are saying, under these circumstances, I work best. In fact, I've said to leaders, I know that when it's just me personally, when it's a dynamic where people are raising voices and it's a very heated situation, I can't be at my best. I'm probably going to say things that I regret. And I, even for several hours after that, just know that I can't really focus on my work the same. So when those situations arise, here's what I'm going to do to make sure that I can be at my best. And then talk about that with them. So I've had those conversations, and it's a dialogue, it's opening that, but you can still decide what you're going to do with that and still decide, how to protect your heart, mind, spirit, soul, etc. And the emotional intelligence course would be a great way. We actually go through a kind of problem solving in that and have several different ways to help, navigate that specifically. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Great. This person says, I don't see myself as a natural leader. Can I learn how to evolve and become a better leader?
Especially yes. Absolutely. And, some people think, if you're a leader, you're either born with it or you're not. And I'm a leadership coach, and I've worked with people for a long time, and I know that's not the case. Now, we all are born with certain strengths. And so deciding, how can I use those strengths to make me a better leader or a good leader will help you. If some people view leadership as someone who's outgoing, so maybe you're an introvert. Maybe your strength is connecting with people one-on-one. Maybe your strength is really understanding some of those office kind of politics, and you really understand behind the scenes. I'm just throwing some things out there. But it doesn't mean you have to change who you are. You don't have to become an extrovert to be a leader. You can still be an introvert and operate through influence. All the things we talked about today in terms of building collaboration, reach out to people one-on-one. You do have to choose to operate through influence. You have to choose, okay, I want to be a leader, and here's some things that I can do to be a leader, just like the things we talked about in the presentation today. Build trust, connect with people, ask questions, get to know what's on their mind, maybe be the voice of people to help move them towards problem solving. We can influence through individual relationships the same that we can influence as, the CEO of the company. We just have to really focus on, what's most important. So yes, you can learn it through practice, consistency, and we have tons of courses. This is not a sales pitch. This is a genuine, from my heart, that we have a ton of courses that help you specifically in how do I develop the skills how do I identify the skills I have, and how do I develop them to become a better leader?
Great. We have a couple more questions. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. How do we handle an uncooperative team member who doesn't like change? Do we drag them kicking and screaming? How do we work with someone with that kind of personality?
This is a tough one, isn't it? And just like there's typically some angry person that we work with, there's also typically some people that are resistant to change. Maybe they've worked at the company a long time. Maybe they just, don't like change, and that's just how they are. So you're right, we can't drag them kicking and screaming, nor can we say, just do it and be happy. None of those things work. But if we focus on relationship first, always, and try to operate through influence, building collaboration, also helping to bring the team together. Many times if someone is resistant to change and they see that the rest of the team is less resistant or is starting to embrace it, it may become easier for them to do that. Sometimes I've actually empowered some people on the team who are the first followers, as I will use that phrase, to bring alongside, would you spend some time with Joe and, help him work through some of the things that he's struggling with right now, or as a leader, get to know what are Joe's fears about this. Most of the time we're resistant to change because there's some fears that are underlying. And if we can build a relationship, talk about what those fears are, acknowledge them, and we can't necessarily make those fears go away, but we can help that person to see that there's purpose in this. The other thing I like to do if there is someone who is resistant to change, I actually have made them a part of the team that's leading the change. So maybe you have, you know, a new employee process that you're rolling out, that all the team is going to start meeting every day. And I know that Sally has been really resistant, kind of, you know, stick in the mud, not wanting to be a part of it. I'll go to Sally and say, Sally, you have been here a long time. You've been a key resource for us. And I know you have a lot of thoughts on how we do this new employee process. Because it's true, she has a lot of thoughts. She may have expressed them in the opposite, but she has a lot of thoughts. I would like you to be a part of helping us figure out how can we make this happen, because this is what we need, whether keep it big picture goal, this is what we need to make happen. I would love for you to be a part of this team. Now, this will not always work with all dynamics, but I've used this a lot, not in a manipulative way, but in a genuine way. And when you empower people all of a sudden to be a part of the solution, they can't be in the camp of I'm a part of the problem. You've kind of nicely, gently forced them to that I'm in the part of the solution group. And they're going to likely, maybe a little bit begrudgingly, and maybe have more questions. But if they recognize the weight of this is a little bit on me and I have influence in this, many times, you know, that will actually gain their buy-in. Because what you want to do is gain their buy-in, not in a manipulative way again, but in a relationship focused and embracing their perspective way. It might not always work. You may have to ultimately come down and say, you know, after you've worked through fears, you foster relationships, you may have to go to having some tough conversations, but relationship first always will likely lead you to your goals much more effectively.
Great. I know last question, since we're hitting the top of the hour here, those who need to jump off, please feel free. This is a two-part question, a little lengthy, so I'll give you the first, I'll give you the whole question and then we can divide and conquer the answer here. The first part is, do you think that it is okay to want to be involved as a leader in working closely with employees that you assign to a certain project? For example, building a footbridge or other projects that you would like to contribute to as well. Second part is, and how do you not overstep while being involved in these projects? For example, how do you make sure individuals do not feel like we are not micromanaging while being involved in the success of a project?
So good. I'm so glad this question came up. And the first thing I'm going to say is a couple of our courses, we go more in depth on this because this is a key part of leadership, and it's really, it's a fine line. Becoming a transformational leader, or if you're in IT, there's several promoting with becoming an IT leader related to leadership, specifically more in depth on this. But I will say that recognizing, number one, that you don't want to be a micromanager is important. And number two, something I mentioned earlier in this webinar was, you know, keep it big picture focused on what is the overall goal and the solution while not getting in the details. Now, I know this is usually hard for leaders because many leaders have been promoted to where they are. You were a great developer and now you're the manager of other developers. You were a great IT project manager, and now you're managing other project managers. And you know you could step into that job and do it. In fact, you loved doing that job. And so now your job isn't to necessarily be in the weeds and the details. So it's a really fine line. You need to have self-awareness. You're going to need to consistently pull yourself back. Am I reaching out to people to be focused on the big picture? In other words, what is the goal and how are we getting there? Or am I reaching out, am I getting too in the weeds, excuse me, with these questions? Or how our discussion. Because sometimes your team members are going to develop a way to do things that might be better than yours. And I hate to say it, but it's true. And I've learned this the hard way also. I've done a job and I think, okay, this is what works. This is what you should do. And I can get stuck on, why aren't you doing it, you know, my way? And then that can obviously create this friction and not a healthy work environment and may inhibit us from new ideas. So helping them, sharing feedback, maybe you do have a great way, and saying, would you like some perspective, or would you like my ideas on that? That's okay, that's good. But really having some self-awareness of how much time, where are my conversations focused? Are they in the weeds and the details, or are they big picture, focus on problem solving, not task managing? And you're also going to want to think about, especially in the remote dynamic. So in our managing remote teams, we go into this topic several hour discussion on it, because you have to think about how can I make sure those problems are getting solved, and you know what's getting solved because your boss is probably going to call you and say, how's it going with XYZ project? And you don't want to feel like you're micromanaging by calling everyone on your team every day and asking for every detail. So engage them in this conversation. I think one of the best things we can do as leaders on this question is talk to your teams, because they likely know that it's something that you're working on. And if you have been micromanaging in the past, it'll create a trust and transparency that will actually strengthen your relationship of, hey guys, in fact, I've had this conversation with people. I know I've fallen into micromanaging and I don't want to do that. I want to be better at this. And because I know it makes our team most effective, but I also know that I'm responsible to report on project updates, that I get calls from my boss who needs to know a lot of the details, and I need to be able to answer those questions. So how can we together come up with a way that we can provide that? So maybe that's a technology, maybe that's, you know, new reports you're creating, just engaging them in how do we want to communicate, what do we want to communicate, what does that look like, will likely help you, you know, get to that big picture goal while evolving it, of course, but engaging them in that would be one of the best things you could do as a leader.
Great answer. Thank you. Everyone, we are at the top of the hour. Thank you so much for joining us on today's session. Really appreciate it for taking the time and joining us. Like I said, recording will be sent out later today for those who joined us, who want to review or pass it on to anyone else who was unable to join us. We appreciate taking the time again, Erin, for speaking on our behalf. With that said, everyone, please stay safe, stay healthy. You may now log off the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.